Hey guys.
Hey guys.
We're back with another Walking Dead review. This time we're reviewing The Walking Dead Season 6, Episode 6, titled Always Accountable. If you haven't seen that episode yet and you want to avoid any spoilers, you're going to want to skip this video and come back later because everything we say from this point forward is going to be a spoiler. What an episode of The Walking Dead. We've had two pretty quiet episodes in a row, so we really kind of needed this high-tension, high-octane episode, and boy, did they ever come through.
This was an amazing episode.
It was so good.
Oh my gosh.
And the thing is, it played out pretty much how we expected it to. If you go, we did two predictions videos because promos just kept coming out and coming out, so we had to do a revision. And when you compile basically all of our predictions, the episode pretty much played out how we thought, but it was still, it was so good. Let's talk about the big thing first, the very last 10 seconds of the episode. As Daryl is driving the truck and he's trying to get somebody on the radio.
Trying to get Rick.
He's trying to get Rick on the radio. We hear Glenn say, "Help."
Yes.
So Glenn is in fact alive. We gotta presume he is under the dumpster.
And trying not to draw too much attention to himself.
Yeah, because it does come across as kind of a whisper.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, I guess it's possible it couldn't be Glenn.
It's totally
Glenn. It's totally Glenn.
It's
Glenn's
totally
alive.
Glenn. Yes.
Ah, we knew it. We called it. Yeah. All right. So, what else going on in this episode? First of all, to me, Abraham had the most interesting story in this episode because he goes through this very major metamorphosis.
Yeah.
Ah, Jinx. But he's had this self-destructiveness going on.
And what's really interesting is that Sasha talked him through it.
Yeah.
Like, because she's been there. She went through what he went through. So she was able to, like, talk him through it. And it was amazing.
But in the end, it took that experience, like, right on the edge of that bridge with the walker, with the RPG walker.
Yeah.
It took that experience and just screaming at his face. And then he kind of came through like, oh, I am crazy, and I need to not be crazy.
I need to stop. This isn't how I should be living.
But Abraham hit the mother load.
Yeah.
RPG with extra rounds.
3 extra rounds.
And a box of cigars, like a not quite half full box of cigars. Yeah. So Abraham made out in this episode.
Yeah, he did.
Plus a new possible love interest for Abraham
looks
with
like
Sasha.
him and Sasha,
Now, if you're not reading the comics, a little bit of a comic spoiler here. Abraham does cheat on Rosita in the comics, so it looks like it's going to be with Sasha in the show. And I don't remember who he cheated on her with in the comics. So if you remember that, let me know down in the comments so I don't have to research it myself. Even though, in my opinion, Abraham had the most interesting story in the episode, Daryl's story was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it was really good. And you kind of, from the promo, you kind of knew that he was going to be mistaken as one of the saviors. We're like 99.9% sure that these are the saviors.
Speaking of the saviors, I'm like 95% sure that the guy who is in the group, the guy and the 2 girls, I'm pretty sure that's Dwight from the comics.
Yeah. So the group that takes him, they were part of the Saviors group. At first, I just assumed that they were part of a community the Saviors was helping. But no, I definitely think they were part of the group and they decided to leave. And they think that Daryl is in the groups, was part of the groups, which just kind of goes to show how big this group is, that they were part of it and didn't know everybody.
They said they were part of it from basically the beginning, and they hadn't met everyone, so they didn't know if Daryl was part of it or not. And they just assumed that he was.
Well, he looks very rough.
Yeah. And plus, since they escaped, but then they're coming back, if you're familiar with the comics, I'm going to talk about the comics a little bit here. If you're familiar with Dwight from the comics, he has this huge scar on his face. I imagine that's going to be this guy's penalty for leaving.
For leaving, yes.
And of course he does come back, but he's still got to pay a price because you just can't have that kind of thing. So next time we see him, big old scar right across his face.
Yeah. What was interesting is that, this group takes Daryl hostage and they think that he's one of the saviors. And when Daryl escapes, he doesn't harm them. He doesn't mean them any harm because he understands kind of, like, They didn't mean him any harm. They could have just killed him, and they didn't. But like as he's rifling through the bag, he sees the insulin, and we knew he was going back.
Yeah.
There's no way he knew that the little girl, well, the young girl, fainted. So he knew they were for her.
Mm-hmm.
She was the most innocent of the group. There was no way he was not going back to give that insulin back to them.
Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting bit of bait and switch foreshadowing with Daryl's story. Like when he collapses after, pushing his bike for who knows how long.
Yeah.
And he just collapses, and he collapses next to a small framed walker who's wearing a motorcycle helmet and who's burned out. But so you could easily say, okay, that's foreshadowing Daryl's death. I think it was actually foreshadowing the younger girl's death.
Yeah,
because
it was
such
foreshadowing a death around him.
Yeah.
And
they love to do this with Daryl. Like when Daryl was with Beth, and when she's playing the piano, and he hopped in the coffin, Beth died.
Yeah.
They love the bait and switch foreshadowing with Daryl, and I think that's what this was in this episode.
I was really disappointed in this group because, Daryl had every reason to just leave them behind.
Mm-hmm.
He could have just left the duffel. They might have found it, but he brings it back to them. And then when they get cornered, he helps them escape. He brings them in the right direction because they were about to run off in where the other people had infiltrated. Yeah. He helps them so much. And the guy even says, you didn't have to help us. Like, we held you captive. We did all these bad things to you, and you helped us. And then he goes to help him once more and bring him to Alexandria, this community that he has, and they betray him.
Yeah, they turn on him. They take his crossbow. Daryl is now without his crossbow, and he's without his bike.
Yeah.
So they've basically stripped Daryl. Daryl, in effect, is nude now.
Yeah, and it didn't make any sense for them to do that. That's just they've been with that group so long that they just believe that's how the world is or something. Because I'm like, he is a good person. He's helped them out. He didn't have to. He did all these things above and beyond what anybody else in the apocalypse would have done. And he's going to take them to his group. If he comes from this group, you gotta imagine this group's gotta be pretty good. And instead of going with him, they decide to take his bike and go.
In the end, it's the ultimate act of cowardice.
Yeah.
Which, if this guy is Dwight, and I think he is, that is very
that is very much Dwight.
Dwight as we first meet him in the comics.
Yeah, and I was just, it's like going back to what was familiar. After the girl died, it's like it doesn't matter now because they were doing all this for her.
Yeah.
And now that she's gone, they're just gonna. It's familiar. They'll go back.
And speaking of the girl, in our predictions, we did say one of the members of that small group, that trio, was going to die. And as soon as we saw that group and we saw, okay, one of them's younger, it's going to be her.
And then you see the insulin, you're like, oh, yeah, it's totally going to be her. They did all this to get her insulin. I'm imagining they robbed the insulin and left for her. So, yeah.
It's a very kind of twisted parallel with Beth.
Yeah,
the story of the younger girl in that little trio.
Speaking of that little girl's death, those were probably my favorite zombies of this episode.
Yeah.
Because at first I was like, well, at least they were dead when they were
because it looked like
burnt.
they were plastic bags
it looked like
over
they were
their
covered
heads,
in
and they
plastic
had been
bags.
suffocated.
Yeah. No, they were in a greenhouse, and the fire burned so hot it melted the glass, and the glass came down. So no, they probably died in the fire, and then were just encased in glass.
They probably died of asphyxiation from the smoke.
Yeah.
And then the glass melted and encased them in glass.
Yeah, but that was a super, super cool effect.
It's really cool walk.
Amazing.
Yeah. Kudos to Greg Nicotero for that, because that was awesome.
That was my favorite zombie this week.
Speaking of favorites, I think this might be my favorite episode of season 6 thus far.
This was amazing.
Although episode 2 was really, really good.
Yeah, it
was. This might be a tie with episode 2, because episode 2 was pretty awesome, but this one is right up there.
And okay, the intelligence that was coming through on this episode. One, Sasha. I'm so glad I was wrong about Sasha dying last season, because oh my gosh, she's brilliant in this episode.
Yeah.
Because when they get split from Daryl, she's like, well, Daryl's a tracker. She leaves a footprint, and then they go in a building and write Dixon on it. That could have been written at any point. It doesn't look fresh. I mean, she chose something that wasn't going to look like she just put it up there. And she knew that he would find the footprint, track them in that direction, and then see his name and be like, oh, that's where Sasha and Abraham are.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it was so
She
brilliant.
said the best way to get found by a tracker is to stay still, and she's right. And yeah, and I
Her
thought
plan was brilliant.
I thought for sure at the end of the episode though, when Abraham is in the dress uniform and he's looking at Sasha and she looks at him and he goes, "What?" I thought for sure that walker behind him was going to bust through the glass and get him. Like I thought, well, that's totally something The Walking Dead would do.
Yeah. And then, oh gosh, who else was brilliant? Oh. And then Daryl had like a stroke of genius when he hides his motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
Like he knew he couldn't drag it anymore, but he had to make sure he wasn't being followed still, so he hides it in the brush. Oh, so smart.
Yeah.
So smart.
Okay, they haven't shown the promo yet for next week because Into the Badlands was premiering and they cut the time in between. So we didn't get a promo yet. I don't know if I'm going to stay up and watch it. We'll do our predictions video tomorrow, so we'll
We'll make sure we watch it before tomorrow.
Every promo that possibly gets released between now and our predictions video, we'll watch and we'll do our predictions tomorrow after work. Also, keep an eye out for our 500 subscriber celebration giveaway video because we hit 500 subscribers and then some today. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I think that's it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for this video. If we missed anything, if we got something wrong, if we didn't talk about something you think we should have, let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to let us know by clicking the like button and subscribe for more reviews.
And thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.